Settle yourself in a comfortable position. Let your breathing slow. The world outside begins to fade, leaving only the quiet rhythm of your own heartbeat and the faint whisper of imagined snow falling on distant fields. Tonight, we travel back more than 2 centuries, to the long, uncertain march of men who followed one of history's most ambitious leaders. The Napoleonic Wars reshaped Europe, but behind the grand strategies and painted portraits lay a far less glorious reality. A world of endless mud, bone-deep cold, hunger that dulled the senses, and the slow erosion of hope. In the calm of the present, it is difficult to imagine the scale of their ordeal. These were ordinary men, farmers, tailors, carpenters, drawn into the machinery of empire. They marched east across the continent, chasing the vision of a single man's dream of destiny. Many never returned. Those who did carried memories that felt more like frozen echoes than stories. Tonight, we will walk among them, not as generals or heroes, but as quiet observers, drifting unseen through their camps, listening to the soft crunch of frost under worn boots, hearing the muffled breaths of men huddled together for warmth. You will notice the rhythm of their days, the scraping of tin bowls, the distant rumble of carts, the fragile glow of firelight against canvas. You will sense the fatigue that never leaves them, the endless repetition of movement, a march that feels more like a trance than travel. This journey will unfold slowly, in 4 long movements, each one a chapter in the strange, half-frozen symphony of Napoleon's world. First, we will walk the endless white expanse of the march to Moscow, feeling the ache of hunger and the cruel patience of winter. Then, we will drift through the life of Napoleon himself, tracing the rise of a Corsican boy who dreamed himself into legend and then watched his empire crumble. Next, we will move quietly among the remains of the Grand Army's lost camps, where archaeologists now uncover fragments of a vanished age. Spoons, buttons, scraps of dreams left buried in the soil. Finally, we will step into the contrasting world of Napoleon's dinner table, a place where order, ritual, and strange calm persisted, even as chaos consumed the continent. All of it will unfold slowly, like a dream, soft voices, dim candlelight, and the muffled echoes of history half remembered. Now, let us begin our journey, into the snow, into the hunger, into the silence of men who once followed the eagle across Europe. Why you wouldn't survive Napoleon's march to Moscow? Imagine opening your eyes before dawn. You lie on frozen ground, a thin blanket stiff with frost, the canvas of your tent sagging under a crust of ice. Around you, 1,000 shapes stir, bundled forms that once were soldiers. Their breaths form clouds that rise and vanish into the pale air. There is no bird song, no morning warmth, only the sound of cloth cracking as men try to move their stiff limbs. The year is 1812, and you are part of Napoleon's Grand Army, the largest military force Europe has ever seen. You have crossed rivers, forests, and plains for months, following the emperor east toward Russia. At first, the march was full of music, brass bands, banners, confidence. But that was before the roads turned to mud, before the sky grew heavy and the food began to run out. You reach for your ration bag. Inside are only crumbs. The bread has long since gone hard, blackened with mold. Some men scrape the bottoms of their mess tins, licking the last trace of grease. Others chew on leather straps, softened in boiling water. The officers tell you that supplies are coming, that the emperor has planned everything. But you have not eaten properly in days, and the wind that scours the open steppe cuts through every layer of your uniform. The march resumes at first light. The column stretches for miles, a river of gray coats, rifles slung, boots crunching through snow. Horses stumble under the weight of frozen packs. Wheels creak, splinter, and sink into ruts that freeze over by the hour. You march because everyone else does. There is no destination you can truly picture, only the word Moscow, spoken like a charm that will make the suffering worthwhile. The road seems endless. Frost gathers on the edges of your eyelashes. Every breath feels like drawing knives into your lungs. Somewhere ahead, officers bark orders muffled by scarves. Somewhere behind, a cannon overturns and is left behind, abandoned in the snow like a fallen beast. By midday, the sun appears, pale and cold, a distant coin in the sky. The air smells of smoke and damp wool. You pass a cluster of huts once belonging to Russian peasants. They are empty now, burned to blackened shells by retreating forces. Inside, ashes still cling to the hearthstones. Someone has scrawled words on a wall, a curse, or perhaps a prayer. You do not understand it. The men fight over the remnants of food, a handful of oats, a few turnips buried in the dirt. Some find a stray dog. Others do not ask where the meat in the stew came from. Hunger, at this point, has no language. When the march begins again, you hear songs, faint, hollow songs that men hum through cracked lips, not from joy, but to keep their rhythm. A drum beats somewhere ahead, its sound soft and heavy like a heartbeat. By evening, the snow begins again. It falls in slow, endless spirals, muffling every sound. The army stops for the night. You pitch your tent if you still have one. Many do not. Some sleep sitting upright, leaning on their rifles, afraid to stop moving for too long. Frost creeps across your blanket. Your hands are numb, your feet a dull ache. The firewood is damp, and smoke stings your eyes. Someone nearby coughs, a deep, rattling sound that seems to echo through the camp. Another man does not wake in the morning, his face peaceful under a layer of snow. You do not speak about it. There is nothing to say. As days pass, discipline fades. Horses collapse and are stripped for food within minutes. Rifles are abandoned because they are too heavy to carry. The columns thin out. The songs stop. When you reach a frozen river, the crossing becomes chaos. Ice cracks under cannon wheels. Men slip and vanish beneath the surface, swallowed by the current. The sound is strange. A soft splash, a shout that fades instantly, as if the cold itself consumes it. Still, the march continues. The emperor rides ahead, wrapped in his greatcoat, surrounded by guards. Some say he never feels the cold, others whisper that he does, but hides it better than anyone else. To you, he is a distant figure, part myth, part man, moving steadily toward a city that no longer exists. Because by the time you reach Moscow, the city is burning. The fires glow orange against the black sky. Whole districts crumble into ash. The Russians have abandoned their homes and set their own capital ablaze. There is nothing left to claim. No supplies, no shelter, no victory. The men wander through streets lined with silence. They break open doors and find only soot. Snow begins to fall again, settling gently over the ruins. You stand there, staring at the flickering remains of a city that was supposed to end the war. Instead, it marks the beginning of the retreat. The road back is worse. Temperatures plunge below anything you have known. Frostbite takes fingers, ears, toes. Entire regiments vanish overnight. The snowdrifts are so deep they swallow the dead. Wolves follow the columns, quiet and patient. You move like a shadow now, one foot, then the other, guided only by instinct. The landscape blurs into a white void. Sometimes you see the outlines of villages on the horizon, but they dissolve like mirages when you approach. At night, the stars shimmer faintly through the frozen air. They look close enough to touch, sharp as glass. You think of home, of warmth, of bread that does not crack your teeth. When dawn comes, you rise again. There is no other choice. The march to Moscow, and the long, terrible retreat, was less a campaign than a slow surrender to nature. Of the more than 600,000 soldiers who set out, barely a fraction returned. The rest became part of the landscape, frozen into the rivers, buried under drifts, or remembered only through the objects they left behind. The snow will hold their silence for generations. And now, as the wind quiets and the fires of Moscow fade into darkness, We leave them behind, still marching, endlessly east, through the memory of a winter that never truly ends. The rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Imagine a candle flickering in a quiet Corsican room. The air smells faintly of salt from the nearby sea and of ink drying on parchment. It is 1769, and in the small island town of Ajaccio, a baby named Napoleone di Bonaparte cries for the first time. His mother, Letizia, is only 19. His father, Carlo, works as a lawyer, proud of their modest nobility. Outside, the island still bears the marks of rebellion, stone walls cracked by cannon fire, fields still bruised from the battles that made Corsica part of France. From these rough beginnings, a strange and restless child grows, quiet, watchful, often withdrawn from the play of other children. He prefers solitude, the feel of the sea wind, the study of heroes from ancient Rome. He dreams of order and greatness, concepts too large for the narrow alleys of his birthplace. At 9 years old, he is sent to mainland France, a foreigner among French boys, mocked for his accent, his name, his stubborn pride. He learns quickly to hold his silence. He listens more than he speaks. In that silence, ambition begins to crystallize, cold, precise, unyielding. At the military school of Brienne, he studies maps the way others study prayers. His instructors describe him as moody, brilliant, sometimes abrasive, yet there is something magnetic in his seriousness. He graduates to the École Militaire in Paris, where the young Napoleon becomes a soldier not just by training but by conviction. France, at the time, trembles on the edge of revolution. The monarchy cracks under debt, famine, and anger. The streets of Paris echo with chants, gunfire, and change. Napoleon, barely 20, finds himself swept into the storm. He serves in the artillery, a branch that values logic over lineage, and it suits him perfectly. The revolution opens doors that birth alone could never have unlocked. Old generals fall, new men rise. By his mid-20s, Napoleon has proven himself at Toulon, directing batteries that force the British to withdraw. His skill for organizing chaos earns him notice, and from there, his ascent feels almost inevitable. But his genius lies not only in battle, it lies in rhythm, the rhythm of movement, supply, morale, timing. He can sense the pulse of an army, how it breathes, how it falters, how to make it flow again. Soldiers say that when Napoleon rides by, fatigue seems to lift from their shoulders. He marries Josephine de Beauharnais, a widow 6 years his senior. She is charming, elegant, connected to the Parisian elite. Napoleon adores her with an intensity that surprises even him. His letters to her are full of yearning and volatility, a man torn between tenderness and the demands of destiny. But Josephine is pragmatic, shaped by survival in revolutionary France. Their love is deep but fragile, tested by distance and the constant movement of war. His first great campaign, Italy, 1796, transforms him from a name into a legend. The soldiers who march with him are ragged, hungry, unpaid. Yet he leads them with fire. Soldiers, he tells them, you are naked, ill-fed. The government owes you much, it can give you nothing. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. His armies reshape borders like wet clay. He establishes the Napoleonic Code, a new legal order that values merit and rationality. He reforms education, taxation, and administration. Roads and bridges rise. Bureaucracy tightens. The chaos of revolution is replaced by structure. Yet the structure has a heartbeat, and that heartbeat is war. To maintain his empire, Napoleon must keep it moving. Every treaty contains the seeds of another campaign. Every ally is a potential rival. Spain bleeds, Prussia smolders. Austria waits. England, that island fortress, refuses to bend. In 1805, the Grand Armée gathers for the campaign that will make history. At Austerlitz, under the pale December sun, Napoleon feigns weakness, drawing his enemies into a trap of mist and light. When the fog lifts, his troops strike from the flanks, splitting the Allied forces. The battle becomes legend, a masterpiece of timing and deception. From that summit, the descent is slow but steady. The empire grows too vast, the wars too many, the hunger for control too consuming. Spain becomes a wound that will not heal. Guerrilla warfare, endless attrition. In Russia, the dream of a single continental order meets the cold reality of distance and climate. You remember the march, the frost, the silence. The emperor is there too, watching his creation unravel. The man who once commanded hundreds of thousands now commands ghosts. In the retreat from Moscow, his power seems to dissolve into the snow. He returns to Paris a shadow of the conqueror he once was. Still, he rebuilds. Still, he believes. But Europe has learned how to fight him. Armies that once feared his genius now study it. In 1814, the coalition closes in. Paris falls. Napoleon abdicates, exiled to the small island of Elba, allowed to rule his tiny realm as a king of nothing. For a while, he seems almost content. He plans roads, organizes schools, watches the sea. But ambition, once awakened, never truly sleeps. In 1815, he escapes. He lands in France with a handful of men, and as he marches north, soldiers sent to arrest him join him instead. The legend breathes again. For 100 days, the emperor returns. France rallies. Old enemies mobilize. It all ends on a rain-soaked Belgian field, Waterloo, where mud swallows dreams and iron meet iron. As cannon smoke drifts away, Napoleon rides from the field in silence. His uniform is spattered with earth, his gaze distant. He knows the pattern of defeat, its slow rhythm, its stillness. He surrenders to the British expecting leniency, perhaps an island in the Mediterranean. Instead, he is sent farther than he could ever imagine, to St. Helena, a lonely rock in the South Atlantic, 6,000 miles from the world he once ruled. There, the rhythm of his life becomes quiet and monotonous. The wind howls constantly. The horizon never changes. He walks the garden paths of Longwood House, dictating his memoirs, rearranging history in words. He speaks of destiny, of betrayal, of how things might have been different. Sometimes he gazes at the sea, tracing the waves with his eyes as if mapping invisible armies. Other times, he stares into the middle distance, lost in thought. And now, in this quiet space between waking and sleep, his story folds back into the silence from which it began. The cry of a Corsican child, the flicker of a candle, the sound of the sea beyond the window, the lost camps of the Grande Armée. Imagine a wide, empty field at dawn. The air is still. Frost glitters on the grass like a thin veil of glass. Somewhere beneath your feet, under a shallow crust of soil and time, lie the traces of an empire that once stretched from Spain to the steppes of Russia. When you kneel down, you can almost hear it. The faint echo of boots on frozen mud, the muted ring of iron on wood, the distant murmur of men speaking in a dozen languages. Then the sound fades, and only the wind remains. These are the lost camps of the Grande Armée, the scattered resting places of an army that once numbered more than 500,000. They exist in fragments now, a spoon here, a button there, a buckle twisted out of shape by rust. The bones of horses lie tangled in the roots of birch trees. Muskets, half buried, peek out like old memories that refuse to sleep. For almost 2 centuries, they lay untouched. Farmers plowed the soil without realizing what lay beneath. Forests grew over trenches once filled with men. The snow, faithful and indifferent, covered everything. It was only in the late 20th century that archaeologists began to uncover them in earnest. At first, the discoveries seemed accidental. A soldier's belt found while digging for a well, a French coin turned up by a plow, a strange metal clasp shining briefly before being swallowed again by dirt. Then, as patterns emerged, the reality became clear. Entire encampments of Napoleon's army still rested under the quiet earth of Russia, Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland. One of the most haunting sights lies near Vilnius, where the army's disastrous retreat crossed the frozen Neris River. Excavations there have revealed rows of makeshift graves, men hastily buried by their comrades before the column moved on. The soil is layered with charcoal from campfires, animal bones, scraps of uniform cloth, and fragments of glass from shattered bottles once filled with brandy or vinegar. The archaeologists work slowly, gently, brushing away centuries of silence with the patience of those who understand that time is delicate. They wear gloves and soft brushes, cataloging each fragment as though it were a heartbeat recovered. They find buttons marked with the imperial eagle, tin spoons engraved with initials, coins stamped with faces long forgotten. Each object tells a story not of conquest, but of survival, or the failure to survive. A spoon, for instance, reveals more than a musket ever could. Its surface, worn smooth, shows where a soldier held it night after night, scraping thin soup from a shared pot. Sometimes initials are scratched faintly into the metal, PL or AB, attempts to claim a tiny piece of identity in an army where men were numbered, not named. One archaeologist once described these spoons as the last personal gesture of humanity before disappearance. In another site, near Smolensk, they find what remains of a blacksmith's forge, a patch of scorched ground, iron fragments, a half-melted horseshoe. Even as the army disintegrated, some men still tried to mend broken wheels, to shape nails from the scraps of fallen wagons. The effort itself was futile, but it speaks of instinct, the refusal to surrender completely to despair. The layers of soil tell their own story. A few centimeters below the surface lie the traces of the campfires, burned wood and ash still visible as dark stains. Deeper still, the earth grows richer, mixed with the remains of uniforms, the wool fibers matted together by time. At the bottom, small bones, sometimes human, sometimes animal, blurred by the damp. The scientists treat every discovery with the same reverence, whether it belongs to a horse or a man. In these fields, distinction no longer matters. The Grand Army's defeat erased rank and title alike. Sometimes, during the excavations, villagers come to watch. They stand quietly at the edges of the trenches, hands folded, whispering to one another. For them, the French invasion is not ancient history. It is a legend passed down through families, tales of strangers who came in glittering uniforms and left in rags, of abandoned weapons, of frozen bodies carried away by spring floods. One elderly woman once told a researcher, "My grandmother said the snow turned black that winter. The ground smoked when it thawed. No one planted for 2 years." There is a strange tenderness in these stories, a recognition that suffering belongs to no nation alone. When the archaeologists uncover remains, they treat them with dignity. The soldiers are reburied under simple crosses or marked stones. Sometimes the French flag is laid nearby, not as a symbol of victory, but of remembrance. In Belarus, near Berezina, where one of the retreat's most desperate crossings took place, entire skeletons of horses have been found along the riverbank. They lie where they fell, still harnessed, still facing the river as though straining toward the opposite shore. Among them, fragments of wooden planks, bits of iron chain, nails, remnants of the pontoon bridges built in haste and abandoned in panic. Standing there today, it is difficult to imagine the chaos of that moment. The river now flows calmly, its surface a mirror of gray clouds. Reeds sway along its edge. The only sound is water and wind, yet under that surface rests 1,000 moments of terror. The cries of men, the splash of collapsing ice, the final silence that followed. Further west, near Kaunas, researchers discovered something different, a mass grave containing hundreds of soldiers who had perished during the retreat. When they were carefully uncovered, the skeletons were found still wearing fragments of uniform, buttons from the 29th Light Infantry, belt buckles from the one-stone Polish lancers, even bits of gold braid from an officer's coat. The scientists studied their teeth, their bones, the trace elements preserved in the soil. They learned where these men came from: France, Italy, Poland, Germany, Holland. The Grand Army was not one nation, but a continent in motion. Its dream of unity, however brief, is written here in the mingled dust of its soldiers. One poignant discovery was the presence of traces of mercury and lead in the remains, a sign of the primitive medicines used to treat disease. The army had carried barrels of ointments and powders, desperate attempts to combat frostbite and infection. But the remedies often poisoned more than they healed. The soldiers' final struggle was not only against the Russians or the cold, but against their own bodies. Among the artifacts, archaeologists sometimes find things that seem almost impossibly personal. A locket containing a lock of hair, a rosary made from seeds, a letter folded into fragments too fragile to unfold. The ink has bled away, but the gesture remains, the act of holding on to memory in the face of erasure. These discoveries remind us that history is not only written in dates and victories, but in the small, persistent objects people leave behind. Each button, each coin, each splinter of wood is a heartbeat preserved in dust. When you walk across one of these fields today, you see none of this, only grass and wind, the occasional cluster of birch trees, and perhaps a marker stone at the edge of a dirt road. There you will find honor, glory, and riches. And so they follow him, across rivers, over mountains, through the fog of battle. His victories come fast and fluid: Lodi, Arcole, Rivoli. In each he shows the same instinct: to move faster, to think clearer, to strike not where the enemy stands, but where it hesitates. By the time he returns to France, the young general has become a myth. His portraits begin to appear: the lean face, the unflinching gaze, the hand tucked into his coat. To a weary and chaotic nation, he embodies something rare: stability through strength. In 1799, after a failed expedition in Egypt and political turmoil at home, Napoleon seizes power. The coup is almost bloodless, unfolding with the quiet precision of a chess move. Overnight, the Republic becomes a consulate, and Napoleon becomes first consul, then emperor. He crowns himself in 1804, placing the laurel on his own head. The Pope stands nearby, a witness rather than a participant. It is a gesture that defines him: audacious, symbolic, serene. For a moment it seems as though Europe bends to his will. His attendants grow old, his health declines. The empire he built continues without him, reduced to memories, to lines in books, to curiosities in museums. In 1821, at the age of 51, Napoleon Bonaparte dies quietly in that distant exile. The sea outside is gray and restless. The islanders note the event without ceremony. The world moves on. Years later, his body is brought back to France. The tomb beneath Les Invalides glows with golden light. Visitors whisper as they circle it, the sound of their footsteps soft against the marble. It is strange, perhaps, to think of this man, once master of Europe, now at rest beneath a dome, his silence more complete than all the speeches he ever gave. Yet his presence lingers, not in triumph, but in the pattern of modern life, in laws, in roads, in the way armies march, in the way ambition still whispers in the hearts of men who dream too big. Napoleon's rise was meteoric, his fall inevitable. Between them lay a life defined by movement, relentless, brilliant, consuming. Yet beneath the soil, an entire world still sleeps. Archaeologists describe the landscape as archaeologically saturated. It means that wherever you dig, history watches from below. Even a shallow trench may open a window into 1812. and each discovery adds a note to a long, quiet symphony, one of endurance, loss, and the slow reclamation of time. In winter, when the snow falls thick and steady, the fields return to how they were, the same stillness, the same silence, only the tools of the archaeologists differ from the shovels of the soldiers, both instruments of survival, both ways of touching the earth in search of something necessary. Some of the recovered artifacts now rest in museums: a cracked porcelain pipe, still darkened from use, a brass belt plate with the imperial N, a child-sized shoe, perhaps carried as a charm, a musket ball lodged in a piece of wood, never fired. Displayed under glass, they appear serene, mute, almost beautiful. But the labels tell their truth. Found near Smolensk, 1812. Recovered from frozen soil, 2003. Traces of human bone present. Visitors move quietly through these exhibits. Children press their hands to the glass. The air inside is cool and faintly metallic. The past feels very close, not distant, not heroic, just human. The archaeologists who work on these sites often describe the sensation of time folding. One moment they are scientists cataloging data. The next, they feel like participants in something larger, as though the ground itself remembers. When they uncover a campfire, they can almost smell the smoke. When they find a spoon, they imagine the soldier's hand that held it. When they find the faint outline of a body, they stop speaking altogether. Some nights, after long days in the field, they write in their journals by the light of a lamp. They describe how the wind sounds the same as it must have sounded to those men 2 centuries ago. They note how the light fades at the same hour. The earth keeps time in its own way, and in that rhythm something gentle happens, a kind of reconciliation between the living and the dead. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but understanding. The Grand Army's lost camps are more than archaeological sites. They are memorials shaped by accident and patience, by the slow work of frost and roots and silence. They remind us that history never truly disappears. It only waits just beneath the surface for someone to listen. When night falls over these fields, the wind picks up again. It moves softly through the grass, through the hollows where tents once stood, through the shallow depressions of forgotten trenches. And if you close your eyes, you might almost hear it, not as sound, but as presence, the whisper of a world that marched too far and left itself behind. So let us leave them now, resting as they have rested for centuries. The snow will return and cover everything again. The buttons, the spoons, the bones, the fire ash, all folded back into the quiet rhythm of the earth. The story of the Grande Armée continues, not in glory, but in this stillness, the stillness of time reclaiming what ambition once took. Dinner at the emperor's table. The tents are lit from within. Beyond the canvas walls, the night is dark and windless, the campfires of the army scattered across the plain like dying stars. But inside Napoleon's command tent, the air is warm, a strange pocket of order in a world falling apart. The table is laid precisely, as it would have been in Paris or Milan. A white linen cloth, smoothed perfectly flat, plates of fine porcelain, some chipped from travel, gleam softly in the lamplight. There are silver utensils, polished daily by the servants who have followed the emperor across continents. On one side, a decanter of red wine trembles slightly each time the wind nudges the tent wall. Here, in the middle of Russia's vast, frozen emptiness, Napoleon insists upon civilization. It is not vanity so much as ritual, an assertion of control, of continuity. The empire may be cracking, the roads littered with the fallen, but inside this tent, dinner is served at 7. The men who wait on him are quiet, they move with care, aware that even the faintest clatter of silver might draw his gaze. Napoleon speaks little during meals. When he does, his voice is calm, deliberate, a tone that allows no interruption. He eats quickly, efficiently, almost mechanically, a bit of soup, a piece of chicken, a slice of bread, rarely dessert. He is a man of appetite, but not indulgence. Even in luxury, restraint governs every motion. Outside, the wind sharpens. Somewhere in the distance, a horse cries, the low, broken sound of an animal sensing the cold too deeply. The guards shift their weight, stamping their feet to keep warm. But inside the tent, the emperor's world remains untouched, illuminated by oil lamps that make the silver gleam like captured sunlight. The contrast is jarring and deliberate. Napoleon believes that order must survive chaos, that refinement must exist even amid ruin. He once said that cleanliness and discipline were the true symbols of civilization. To dine properly in the midst of war was to declare that the empire still lived. The cooks, many of them drawn from Parisian households, perform small miracles each night. They work with whatever they can find: salted meat, dried beans, the occasional hare snared by a soldier. Sometimes, when supplies run low, they grind frozen biscuits into powder to thicken soups. Even so, the meal always arrives on porcelain. Even so, the candles are always lit. Among the guests are his marshals, Murat, Ney, Berthier, and sometimes Davat, men hardened by endless campaigns. They sit stiffly, their uniforms dusted with frost, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. Conversation is polite, sparse. Each knows that behind the measured calm of dinner lies 1,000 unspoken fears. Dwindling ammunition, deserters, the endless march eastward. And yet they eat, they drink, they speak of tactics and weather, of maps and provisions. Outside, tens of thousands of men huddle in the snow with nothing but thin blankets and frozen bread. Inside, the emperor cuts his meat into small, precise pieces. There is no malice in this separation, only necessity. Napoleon believes himself to be the embodiment of the state. If he falters, the illusion of stability collapses. So, he maintains the rituals: meals, baths, uniform inspections, as if by sheer will he can keep the world from unraveling. On some nights he dines alone. He sits at the small folding table, a map spread beside his plate. He eats with one hand, marks positions with the other. The food cools quickly. The ink dries slowly. Aides-de-camp hover nearby, waiting for the next command. When he finishes, he wipes his hands carefully on a linen napkin, folds it, and sets it aside. The gesture is exact, practiced. Then he stands, steps to the entrance of the tent, and lifts the flap. The cold rushes in, sharp, immediate, almost physical. For a moment he watches the darkness. The campfires stretch into the distance, small and flickering, like signals from another world. He listens. Faint laughter, the murmur of prayer, the rustle of canvas in the wind. He knows that many will not survive the night. He closes the flap again, sealing the warmth inside. Those who served in his household later described these dinners with a kind of awe. They said that time itself seemed to pause around him, that he carried his own weather, his own gravity. In the morning, he would rise before dawn, drink a cup of watered wine, and return to the maps. The table would be cleared, the linens washed, the porcelain packed away, ready for the next encampment. The emperor's table traveled with him everywhere, from Austerlitz to Wagram, from Dresden to Moscow. It was both furniture and symbol, the mobile heart of an empire. Even when the army slept in barns or under open sky, Napoleon's table stood, perfectly arranged, under its small white tent. Later, after the campaign's collapse, witnesses recalled seeing pieces of that same table abandoned along the road, the fine wood cracked by frost, the cloth stiff with ice. Servants had been forced to burn parts of the furniture to make fire. The empire's elegance melted into smoke. But before that end, during those brief moments of ritual, the table served its purpose. It reminded the emperor and those around him that they were not yet lost. Imagine for a moment the smell inside that tent: wax, leather, cold metal, and faint traces of roasted meat. The air heavy with candle smoke, but soft compared to the biting frost outside. the tablecloth edges trembling slightly each time the wind pressed against the tent. The flicker of lamplight reflected in Napoleon's eyes, steady, focused, remote. Around him, the world was unraveling. But here, for 1 hour each evening, order persisted, a miniature civilization surrounded by darkness. Historians often debate Napoleon's motivations, whether he dined this way out of arrogance or habit. But the truth may be simpler. Ritual keeps men sane. In the midst of chaos, repetition becomes a form of prayer. Every folded napkin, every precise motion, was a quiet defiance against the void. The emperor's servants understood this. They polished the silver not because it mattered to the war, but because it mattered to the rhythm of survival. The gleam of the metal, the smooth surface of the plates, the scent of freshly laundered linen, all reminders of a world that still had rules. After dinner, Napoleon sometimes took tea. He preferred it weak, almost colorless, and drank it while reading dispatches. The tent would fall silent except for the faint scratching of his quill. Outside the snow thickened, inside the light burned on, a single island of calm and an ocean of exhaustion. In the servants' quarters, a few meters away, his cooks would sit quietly, eating their own meager rations, often the scraps of the emperor's meal. They spoke in low voices, aware of how close they were to power, and yet how far. Sometimes they could hear him dictating letters, his voice flat and unwavering. It was said he could compose entire military orders without lifting his eyes from the map. When at last the candles were extinguished, the tent fell into darkness. The emperor lay down on his field bed, still half-dressed, his sword beside him. He slept lightly, sometimes only an hour at a time, waking to call for reports. Even in sleep, the war followed him. Outside, the men dreamed of home, of bread, of warmth, of women's voices. Inside the tent, Napoleon dreamed of Europe. Both dreams, in their own way, were fading. Letters from the front. Imagine a frozen morning in 1812. The sun rises dimly above a frost-bitten landscape, brushing the edges of the horizon with pale, colorless light. Snow crunches underfoot, and the distant rattle of muskets and cannon has long since faded, replaced by the whisper of wind over abandoned camps. In a small, tattered tent, a young soldier dips a quill into ink, shaking slightly as his frozen fingers struggle to hold it steady. He is alone for a moment, writing to someone he will never touch until months, perhaps years later, if at all. The letter begins simply, "My dearest Marie." He describes the frost, the endless march, the smell of damp wool, and the river that swallowed so many of their horses. He writes not to complain, not to dramatize, but to preserve a trace of normalcy, a fragment of life that the world of war has not yet stolen. Letters like these were lifelines. They bridged the immense distance between home and front, between love and survival. And in them, the humanity of the army survived, where discipline, uniforms, and tactics could not. Not all letters are so tender. Some are brief, almost perfunctory, recording only fact. "We left Smolensk on the 15th. Supplies are low. Morale is weakening." Others attempt humor, dark, fleeting, like a candle flickering in the snow. "The frost eats through my boots faster than the enemy ever could. I will return home with more holes in my shoes than stories in my head." Many letters never reached their intended recipients. They were lost in the chaos of retreat, blown from carts, buried in snow, or destroyed by fire. Yet some survived, tucked into envelopes that hardened like stone in the cold, or hidden in the seams of coats, waiting decades before being discovered. Imagine a stack of these letters now, faded and brittle, the ink smudged but still legible. Each page holds a rhythm, the pauses, the corrections, the unspoken fears. They reveal not only the events of the campaign, but the inner lives of the men themselves. In one letter, a soldier writes to his mother, "I have not seen a warm bed in months. My fingers are permanently numb, yet I cling to the hope of hearing your voice again, of the smell of bread baking, of your hand on mine. It is all I can carry with me. In another, a young officer writes to his brother, I am no longer certain of the emperor's ambitions. The maps grow larger each day, the distances unending. We move like ghosts across a white world that does not notice us, that does not care for our pain. Some letters attempt to explain events to family members who could hardly understand the scale of what had happened. A lieutenant writes to his father, We marched through villages where the houses had been abandoned for months. Fires still smoldered in the hearths. Dogs roamed the streets alone. It was not war so much as the slow disappearance of a world. And there are letters of small personal concern. A soldier worries about his horse, about a pair of gloves lost in the mud, about the dog he left behind. He scrawls, I pray that my little patch of garden survives the winter. Tell Marie to plant the violets I so loved. If they bloom next spring, I will have a reason to smile. The letters show us an intimate geography of fear and longing, a map of hearts more than of land. Each sentence is a thread connecting the chaos of marching, freezing, and starving men to the warmth and continuity of home. Some letters recount the movements of battles with careful neutrality, almost as if the writer were charting weather rather than war. We approached a river, icy and swollen. The enemy was visible only in fleeting patches of smoke. We moved in columns, stepping over the frozen ground, unsure of what awaited on the other side. The day passed without significant loss. Others, however, attempt to explain the inexplicable. I saw men fall not from bullets but from exhaustion itself. They lay in the snow like discarded tools. I have no words to describe it, only to note that it is true. Each step forward takes more of my strength than I knew I had. Families, too, wrote back. They offer hope, gossip from villages, reminders of simpler times. Your father has planted beans. Your sister sang a song yesterday. And the spring seems to be arriving slowly but surely. Do not lose faith. We wait for you. The letters serve another purpose as well. They are markers of identity. Soldiers, who were often numbered in official records, inscribed their individuality in ink. They signed initials, drew small sketches, traced small patterns, wrote jokes or nicknames, and in doing so, resisted being reduced to statistics. Some letters contained sketches, a crude outline of a woman's face, a map of a village, a drawing of a horse. Others held pressed leaves or tiny flowers. Even the smallest gestures, a flourish at the end of a sentence, a careful underlining, reveal a human insistence on continuity. One poignant example comes from a young drummer boy, perhaps no older than 14, who writes to his father, I have learned to play the drum louder than the wind. It is not music, but it makes the men march. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine it is a song for home, and for a moment I am not cold and I am not afraid. Archaeologists have since discovered some of these letters preserved under snow or hidden in the seams of uniforms. The ink may be faded, the paper brittle, but the voice is unmistakable. When read aloud, they carry a quiet cadence, slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic, a rhythm born of necessity, survival, and hope. Occasionally, a letter contains a note about a comrade lost. John collapsed yesterday. We buried him by the edge of the forest, in a shallow hole, marked with a stick. I fear the frost will carry him away before spring. I think of him often and speak his name when no one hears. These fragments remind us that even in disaster, humans seek ritual. Writing, though unable to save them, becomes a small act of control. It is a way to mark existence, to reach across distance, to keep life from vanishing entirely. The letters also reveal subtle contrasts between the officer class and ordinary soldiers. An officer's letters often detail logistics, orders, or political observations. The Russians refuse to engage in the open, retreating in a pattern calculated to stretch our lines. Morale is fraying, but the men endure. Supplies are minimal, yet discipline holds. Barely. Meanwhile, a private's letters focus on the immediate and personal. My feet are wet, my hands are numb. I long for a warm fire and bread. The men around me cough constantly. Some will not live to see the next town. I fear the frost more than the enemy. The cumulative effect of these letters is a portrait not only of war but of human endurance. The reader experiences the cold, the hunger, the loneliness, but also the small, almost imperceptible acts of hope. A sketch, a joke, a prayer, a folded flower. Some soldiers wrote letters they never intended to send, knowing they might be lost or intercepted. These unsent letters often reveal the most honesty, doubts about the campaign, fears about survival, reflections on mortality. In them, the soldiers' inner lives become the landscape, and the external campaign is background. One historian described a batch of recovered letters this way: "They are not records of history, they are history itself. Each fold, each smudge, each stain is evidence that these men lived, that they felt, that they hoped, and that they were human amidst the machinery of empire." The letters, in their quiet way, also document time's passage. Seasons shift, supplies dwindle, frost thickens, snow melts and returns. The writers note these changes as markers of endurance. The rhythm of the campaign traced through ice and mud, through frostbite and fever, through waiting for a letter from home that may never arrive. For the modern listener, these letters offer something rare: intimacy without urgency. They are detailed enough to be informative, vivid enough to create atmosphere, but calm enough to allow the mind to wander. They are whispers across centuries, not shouts, murmurs in the dark, not explosions. One letter, written by a soldier near the Berezina River, reads, "We crossed the ice in silence. The wind bit through our coats. I watched men stumble and disappear. I am warm enough, but only because I do not stop moving. I write now, and for a moment the cold is elsewhere, and I am elsewhere too." It is this small displacement, a mental refuge created through writing, that saved many minds, if not bodies. Families received these letters years later, sometimes decades. They preserved them in chests, notebooks, or boxes hidden under floorboards. They became heirlooms, testaments to survival, to endurance, to the persistence of human connection. Imagine reading one aloud, softly, while night falls outside your window. The words echo through centuries. You hear the crunch of snow underfoot, the distant jingle of harnesses, the faint murmur of men moving through frost. But the fear, the hunger, the cold, all of that softens in the rhythm of the sentences. History becomes intimate, tactile, meditative. The letters from the front remind us that even in the harshest winters, even in the most desperate campaigns, humans leave traces of their lives. Ink on paper becomes a bridge across space and time. It becomes a testament to endurance, to thought, to feeling. And so, as the night deepens and the cold presses against your window, you can imagine these letters drifting softly through history. They fold themselves into memory, into silence, into the quiet rhythm of the world. Through them, the voices of the Grande Armée, officers, soldiers, drummers, scribes, continue to speak. Not of glory, not of triumph, not of death, but of existence. And in that existence lies the gentle, slow heartbeat of history itself. The women who waited, outside the reach of snow-covered fields and frozen rivers, life went on in a different rhythm. It was quieter, slower, measured by seasons and chores rather than the march of armies. For the wives, mothers, sisters, and lovers of the Grande Armée, the war was not fought with muskets or bayonets, but with patience, endurance, and an unyielding sense of presence. They waited. Imagine a small village in northern France, the wind rattling through shuttered windows, the scent of wood smoke thick in the air. A woman kneels beside a hearth, stirring a pot of thin soup. Outside, the cold is sharp, but inside, the warmth is muted, enough to preserve comfort, but not to erase longing. Her hands are worn and cracked, her nails stained with ash and water, yet she moves with deliberate calm. She checks the clock, then sets it aside, knowing that it will not alter the slow passage of days. Letters are her lifeline, She reads them again and again, tracing the faded ink with her finger. Each word carries weight, each phrase a small reassurance that the soldier she loves still breathes somewhere in a vast, hostile landscape. Sometimes the letters are brief, merely a line or two. We march east. Frost is biting, but I am alive. Other times, they are long, filled with observations of snow, hunger, and the tedious hours of waiting in frozen bivouacs. Yet even the most mundane details, the texture of bread, the number of horses, the position of the moon, are treasured, preserved like delicate glass. These women understand rhythm in ways men rarely do in war. They mark the passage of time with daily tasks, washing clothes in cold streams, tending to livestock, mending torn fabric, baking bread, and repairing tools. Every chore is a meditation, a means to survive the slow anxiety that accompanies news from the front. Some women become messengers themselves, carrying letters from one village to another, riding horseback through frost and fog to ensure that family members remain connected. Others tend the sick and wounded who have returned from campaigns, learning skills not taught in schools, the skill of wrapping frostbitten fingers, of soothing fevered brows, of quiet vigilance over fragile bodies. There are laundresses who wash uniforms in icy rivers, scrubbing the mud and blood and sweat of men who have returned, exhausted and sometimes dying. They sing softly as they work. The rhythm of the laundry beat a small comfort to themselves and the returning soldiers. The water is cold, the detergent sparse, the task endless. But the ritual creates a sense of order in a world that has gone out of control. Some women wait for months without word. They imagine the march, step by step, as if they could measure it in their own hearts. They place shoes by the door in case their soldier returns. They sew small gifts into uniforms or pockets, a handkerchief, a piece of ribbon, a sprig of dried lavender. Each gesture is a message of hope, a silent insistence that someone will return, that life will continue. Others write letters of their own. They write to the men at the front, offering news of births, deaths, harvests, or village gossip. They tell of the crops planted, the cows milked, the winter that arrives in waves of frost and snow. They remind their loved ones of the world they left behind, as if the memory of home can shield them from the cruelty of the march. Yet not all letters are sent. Some are hidden away, folded and preserved in chests, never mailed, because the journey would be too dangerous or the words too raw. They are diaries in disguise, records of grief, longing, and perseverance, awaiting discovery by a future generation. In rural villages, entire households adapt to the absence of men. Women assume roles previously reserved for men, plowing fields, negotiating with suppliers, tending to livestock, repairing homes. The physical labor is immense, yet it becomes a rhythm, a structure that provides stability amidst uncertainty. By day, they work tirelessly. By night, they light lamps and read or write letters, stitching together the fabric of lives interrupted by war. There are moments of quiet despair. A mother may stand at a frozen riverbank, staring at the distant horizon, imagining the son she sent away months ago, now trudging through snow and mud. A wife may clutch the collar of a coat, inhaling the faint scent of her husband's presence, a scent preserved by time and hope. A sister may whisper prayers for a brother she has not seen since childhood. Despite these hardships, women find ways to create comfort and community. Neighbors share resources, stories, and warmth. Songs are sung in the evenings, often of mundane tasks or small joys, carrying subtle encouragement and reassurance. Some women organize small gatherings, where the community gathers to exchange letters and news, to pass the hours until dawn, to remind themselves that life continues. Many also manage finances. They barter, sell, or trade to keep households afloat. They account for every coin, every loaf of bread, every pair of shoes. Their world is one of meticulous calculation and planning, guided by the knowledge that even small missteps could mean hardship or starvation. Yet beneath the surface of labor and routine lies an emotional world just as vast as the battlefield itself. Women experience fear, hope, despair, and joy in cycles dictated not by events they can control, but by news from afar. When letters arrive, the atmosphere changes. A sudden hush, a cautious reading, a sigh of relief or a quiet tear. The rhythm of the household bends around these arrivals, softening and stretching according to the content of the words. Some women take part in the war more directly. Nurses tend to the sick and wounded in temporary hospitals. They wrap frostbitten limbs, clean sores, and administer basic medicines, learning through experience rather than formal training. They become adept at anticipating pain, soothing fear, and administering comfort with hands hardened by cold and labor. Others become protectors of property. They guard homes against looters, manage small farms, and ensure that their children are fed and clothed. The world of the Grande Armée may be distant, but its consequences reach into every village, touching every hearth and every heart. Occasionally, women undertake dangerous journeys to deliver messages or locate missing soldiers. They ride on horseback through snow-laden forests, guided by memory and instinct. Each mile is fraught with peril, frost, predators, and the risk of encountering deserters or enemy patrols. And yet they travel, silently and steadily, preserving connections that might otherwise be lost. In some villages, women form informal networks. They exchange information about the army's movements, who has returned, and which towns are safe. They coordinate tasks, food distribution, childcare, and supplies, ensuring that the community continues despite the absence of men. Their world is a delicate ecosystem, maintained by vigilance, cooperation, and quiet ingenuity. Some women keep objects as talismans: a piece of cloth from a uniform, a button, a coin. Each item carries meaning beyond its utility. These objects are reminders that those who left are not gone entirely, that memory and presence can persist even across great distances and hardship. As winter progresses, the challenges become more intense. Snow accumulates, rivers freeze, and the cold penetrates walls, clothing, and bone. Yet women persevere, drawing strength from routine, memory, and the fragile hope of reunion. Every chore completed, every letter written or received, every meal prepared becomes an act of quiet defiance against despair. There are also moments of solace. A woman may step outside and watch the moonlight glint across frost-laden fields. She may sit quietly listening to the crackle of a hearth fire or the distant call of an owl. In these moments, the world contracts, and the weight of worry softens. For a brief period, the mind can rest, the body can rest, and the soul can breathe. Children grow in this environment. They witness the absence of fathers and older brothers, yet adapt to new responsibilities. They help with chores, carry water, herd animals, and learn to navigate a world that has changed in profound ways. Even in their play, there is a subtle echo of the larger conflict. Games that mimic marching, letters they pretend to send, fires they light in miniature. Some women write poetry or songs, embedding memories and feelings in rhythms and verses. These creations are never intended for publication. They exist solely to preserve the inner life, to give shape to longing, to mark the passage of days. Through all this, the women who waited maintain a subtle kind of vigilance. They are attuned to the smallest changes: a sound in the wind, a hoofbeat on distant snow, the arrival of a messenger or letter. Their lives are measured not in battles won or lost, but in small victories. A child kept healthy, a household maintained, a letter safely delivered. Even in loss, they persist. Some never see the soldiers they wait for again. Yet they continue the routines, continue the rituals, continue the work that preserves the fragile structure of home, and in doing so, they embody a quiet, often overlooked form of courage, the courage of endurance. These women, though absent from most histories, are essential witnesses to the human cost of war. their experiences carefully reconstructed from letters, journals, and oral histories, reveal an invisible front, a front of patience, labor, and silent resolve. In the long evenings when lamps burn low and the wind presses against walls, women read letters aloud to children, neighbors, or themselves. They repeat phrases, sometimes softly, sometimes deliberately, embedding the words into memory, giving life to voices far away. And in that act, history becomes intimate. The vast, impersonal campaigns of the Grand Army collapse into single moments of connection. A letter read aloud, a spoon scrubbed, a fire tended, a prayer whispered. The rhythm of waiting, the cadence of labor, the subtle interweaving of presence and absence, all of this becomes a meditation on human endurance. Even now, as centuries have passed, the echoes remain, in preserved letters, in village records, in the quiet corners of old houses. One can still sense the patience and vigilance of these women. Their lives were shaped by war, yet defined by resilience, devotion, and the slow, quiet insistence that life continues. The sound of retreat. The retreat begins slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first it is only a sense in the air, a shift in the rhythm of the march, a hesitation in the cadence of boots on frozen ground, a tightening of the lines that once carried confidence and ambition. Imagine yourself among the men of the Grand Army, trudging through snow that seems endless, each step a muted crunch in the early morning silence. The wind carries nothing but the distant whisper of frost against canvas tents and the faint groan of bending trees. There are no birds, no insects, no laughter, only the subtle, persistent pulse of movement across an unyielding landscape. The retreat is not sudden. It is a slow, creeping dissolution of order. Commanders issue instructions, their voices muffled by layers of wool and the vastness of the plain. Soldiers repeat them, mechanically, like a mantra, hoping that repetition can sustain morale when hope itself is scarce. Footsteps fall in uneven rhythms now. Some stagger, some slip, some march with grim determination. Snow grinds beneath boots, and ice crackles faintly with every cautious step. Every sound is amplified by the stillness. A dropped pack echoes as though across a canyon. The flap of a canvas tent resonates in the void. Even the scrape of a sword across a cart is magnified, a small percussion marking the endless passage of the army. Sleep is rare. Dreams are fragmented. When men do rest, it is often in brief intervals. Half awake, ears straining for the distant crunch of enemies, or the eerie silence of the frozen night. Imagine the night sky above. Stars are bright but cold, sharp points of light reflected in the whiteness that stretches without end. Moonlight glints on icy rivers, making them appear solid yet treacherous, like mirrors concealing holes beneath the surface. The landscape is beautiful, almost hypnotic, but it is indifferent to the suffering beneath it. It holds no sympathy, offers no guidance, and yet provides the only constant in a world unraveling. The sounds of the retreat are not only footsteps in wind, they are the subtle cries of horses, strained and weak from days without proper feed, their hooves slipping over ice, the occasional whinny breaking the cold hush. They are the faint murmur of men speaking to one another, terse reassurances, whispered curses, shared observations about the frost and snow. Sometimes a cannon is fired to signal movement, but even that is rare. The artillery is heavy, cumbersome, and increasingly abandoned as men prioritize survival over orders. Footsteps and frost become a rhythm, almost musical in their repetition. Some historians describe it as a haunting cadence. Boots crunch, packs scrape, horses stagger, wind whistles, snowdrifts shift. It is a soundscape that mirrors the physical and mental state of the army, fragmented, uneven, but enduring in its persistence. Frostbite adds a quiet note of terror. Fingers and toes are lost gradually, imperceptibly at first, then suddenly, painfully, men wrap whatever cloth they can find around their extremities, hoping to stave off loss, but it is often futile. The sound of numb limbs moving over hard snow is a subtle accompaniment to the ongoing march, an invisible percussion of suffering. The retreat is punctuated by the collapse of structures. Bridges fail under weight, carts tip and spill their contents, tents are abandoned, and the muffled cries of animals are left behind. Each failure contributes to a growing soundscape of emptiness, the faint echo of civilization receding into the background. Men learn to move with less weight, to anticipate the crack of ice beneath a wagon wheel, to adjust their stride to avoid deep snowdrifts. Amid these challenges, the soldiers' senses become heightened in ways they had never anticipated. Every subtle change in the wind, every shift in the snow, every distant echo of a hoof or boot is observed, catalogued, and interpreted. Some soldiers report hearing phantom sounds, voices calling from the snow, commands shouted in the distance that are never answered. It is the mind's attempt to find patterns, to make sense of chaos, and to preserve sanity in the relentless whiteness. Silence itself becomes a presence. Between footsteps and groans, between wind and the faint scrape of metal, there are stretches of almost perfect quiet. It is in these moments that men feel the weight of isolation most acutely. The army is immense, yet each man experiences the retreat individually. The silence presses in, a tangible companion, a reminder of the vulnerability of the body and the fragility of hope. Snow crunches underfoot with subtle variation, thin crusts over ice, deep drifts hiding obstacles, the uneven compacting of previous footsteps, all produce a complex auditory map. Soldiers become attuned to these variations. They learn to step lightly, to follow tracks that may indicate safer paths, to avoid sudden collapses into hidden hollows. The occasional shout breaks the monotony, a command, a warning, a signal for aid. Sometimes it is followed by immediate response. Other times it drifts unanswered across the plain. The echoes carry long distances in the frozen air, a reminder of the physical space each soldier must traverse alone despite the army's formation. Wind becomes an instrument in the soundscape. It whirls around tents, over carts, across snowdrifts, and through the hollow of forests. It carries debris, twigs, small stones, remnants of abandoned supplies. Clattering softly like percussion, it whistles, hums, and sometimes rises into a mournful keening that blends with the subtle groans of exhausted men and animals. The retreat is also marked by water. Frozen rivers must be crossed. Ice is treacherous. Each step onto solid-looking ice is accompanied by the faint creak, the subtle give beneath weight, the small splash of partially submerged snow. Some soldiers fall through, only to be dragged out by comrades, their wet clothing a soft squelch with every movement thereafter. Even water contributes to the symphony of survival, a reminder that life persists despite treachery and exposure. As the army withdraws, the pattern of sound shifts. Once confident, uniform, and organized, it becomes ragged, sporadic, uneven. Men lag behind, carts are abandoned, horses left tethered to poles or fences. Each step is harder than the last. The auditory landscape mirrors this, becoming fragmented, haunting, and strangely hypnotic. Nights are the most profound. Darkness amplifies every subtle noise. The wind through frozen branches, the scrape of a boot over ice, the murmur of a distant fire. Fires flicker at intervals, casting short-lived light and shadows, the crackle of logs adding texture to the nocturnal symphony. Men huddle near these fires, speaking in whispers, their voices absorbed by the vast stillness. Sometimes they sing quietly, songs remembered from home or invented in the moment, a soft insistence that life continues. The retreat creates a rhythm that is both oppressive and strangely meditative. Men march, rest briefly, eat, and march again. The cadence of the army, the crunch, the scrape, the wind, the distant whistle, becomes a mantra, a meditation on endurance, survival, and the slow passage of time. Each man develops his own relationship with the sounds around him. Some find comfort in predictable rhythms, the steady crunch of boots, the regular rattle of cartwheels, the sigh of wind in familiar directions. Others find themselves haunted, unsettled, listening for sounds that may never come, or fearing those that do. In this frozen landscape, survival is an auditory as much as a physical challenge. Hearing, interpreting, and responding to subtle cues becomes essential. A misjudged step or ignored sound can mean injury or death, yet there is beauty in the complexity, a strange harmony that persists even amid suffering. The sound of retreat is also punctuated by nature's own voice. Icicles break and fall, distant wolves howl, and snow occasionally slides from tree branches with a soft shush. These natural elements blend with human movement, creating a layered soundscape that tells the story of endurance, risk, and adaptation. Soldiers record these experiences in journals and letters when possible. They write about the snow, the wind, the frost, the sounds, and the small victories of movement. Each entry captures the auditory and emotional essence of the retreat, providing historians with insight into the lived experience of survival. Even as the army thins, the soundscape persists. The few remaining men maintain the rhythm, slower now, quieter, each step heavier than the last. The retreat becomes a symphony of endurance, punctuated by loss, sustained by determination, and haunted by absence. As night deepens, the sounds fade into a meditative quiet. Men rest, horses sleep, wind diminishes, and snow muffles the landscape. The retreat is not over, but for a moment, the world contracts, and the rhythm slows. It is a space for reflection, for listening, and for imagining. A reminder that even in the harshest conditions, life persists through sound, memory, and the simple act of movement. The sound of retreat, in its complexity and subtlety, mirrors the human condition. Every step, every breath, every murmur carries with it the weight of experience, the trace of presence, and the echo of endurance. And as the army continues its march across the frozen expanse, these sounds become a lullaby of survival, haunting, gentle, and persistent. Echoes after empire. The war is over, but the world it shaped lingers in whispers, in the silent footprints of soldiers, in the frost-encrusted villages, in the quiet memories of those who survived. Imagine yourself stepping into the years after the Grand Army's disastrous campaigns, walking along frozen roads that once carried the weight of thousands of men, their packs, their cannons, their horses. The snow has melted, rivers run freer, and the forests reclaim their edges, yet traces remain. Abandoned encampments, broken carts, frozen remnants of supplies, scattered buttons, fragments of letters. Each object is a fragment of a story, a gentle echo of human endurance and fragility. The survivors return, often in silence, their bodies changed, their steps slower, their eyes carrying the quiet fatigue of months, even years, in frozen landscapes. They arrive home, some welcomed warmly, others returning to emptiness. The journey back is as fraught as the march forward, though now it is tempered with relief and exhaustion. Imagine a soldier crossing a familiar river, its surface thinner than he recalls, the banks familiar yet altered by time and frost. He steps carefully, noting each stone, each patch of ice, each bend in the current, aware that even home requires careful navigation. The village looks the same, yet the memories overlay it like frost on a window pane. Homes are unchanged, but the rhythms have shifted in his absence. Children have grown, the market has new vendors. The church bell rings with a cadence unfamiliar, yet the air smells of wood smoke and bread, comforting in its constancy. Men who have marched through frost, mud, and chaos now find themselves navigating the subtle patterns of domestic life, the slow, patient rhythm of survival that the women before them mastered. These men carry more than physical scars. Their hands, once nimble and strong, are marked by frostbite, their faces etched by wind and cold, their bodies hollowed by hunger. But beyond the visible, the mind bears a quiet imprint of endurance. They remember the crunch of snow, the eerie silence of frozen nights, the subtle rhythms of retreat. Even laughter is tempered, measured, reflective. The memory of survival is slow, deliberate, persistent. Some veterans attempt to reconnect with their homes through work. Fields must be plowed, livestock fed, fences repaired. Yet every task echoes with the cadence of the march. The repetition of labor, the awareness of weather, the small victories that ensure life continues. These activities, mundane as they may seem, become acts of meditation, a means to reconcile the past with the present. Letters continue to play a role. Those that were never delivered now emerge from chests, hidden compartments, and forgotten drawers. Families read them aloud, sometimes aloud to entire households, drawing the past into the present, tracing the journey of absence, hardship, and resilience. Each word resonates with a soft cadence, a quiet echo of voices long gone, of frost-bitten nights and long marches, of moments when hope was the only companion. Some soldiers become storytellers, recounting their experiences with deliberate calm. They speak of frost, hunger, the slow rhythm of survival, of camaraderie, and the invisible threads connecting men to each other and to home. These stories are not full of glory or conquest. They are stories of persistence, endurance, and subtle triumphs over a landscape indifferent to human suffering. Communities adapt to reintegration. Neighbors and relatives meet returning soldiers with practical concerns, repairs, work, reintegration. Some men are celebrated quietly, not for victories on the battlefield, but for the simple fact of survival. Others, unable to speak of what they endured, carry the weight internally, moving through familiar spaces with cautious attention, noting the contrast between chaos left behind and the slow stability of the present. The sensory world of the veteran is transformed. Snow is no longer purely white. It is layered with memory. The frost on boots, the sheen of rivers crossed, the powdering of abandoned villages. Wind carries echoes of commands shouted long ago, the soft rustle of torn tents, the groan of wheels across ice. Even silence has texture, recalling nights spent in bivouacs under frost-laden trees. Some men record these memories formally, in journals or memoirs. The prose is measured, slow, reflective. It emphasizes the rhythm of experience rather than drama, the slow passage of time, the careful observation of nature, the quiet endurance of human bodies and minds. These written accounts become invaluable, capturing not only the events, but the inner landscape of survival, the way frost can etch into memory as deeply as steel or cannonball. Others turn to crafts and trades. They repair, build, and create, translating endurance into tangible forms. A carpenter might reconstruct a home, a shoemaker repair boots, a weaver create cloth. Each act infused with the rhythm and patience learned on long marches through snow and mud. These activities serve both practical and psychological purposes, grounding the body, focusing the mind, preserving continuity in a world that once seemed chaotic. The return of soldiers is not uniform. Some are welcomed into households that have remained largely intact. Others return to find loved ones gone, villages depopulated, or property lost. In these cases, adaptation becomes both survival and meditation. The slow process of reconstructing life, balancing memory with new reality. Even decades later, the echoes persist. The veterans, now older, carry in their routines the subtleties of the march, a careful step over ice, a measured pace through mud, the precise folding of clothing, the gentle handling of letters and keepsakes. Memory of frostbite, hunger, and isolation blends with the tactile routines of domestic life, creating a unique rhythm, a quiet, persistent echo of experience. Communities memorialize the past quietly. Small markers, crosses, or stones denote places where men fell or rested. Abandoned encampments are recalled in village stories, and annual remembrances occur with subtle rituals. A candle lit, a prayer whispered, a song sung softly. These echoes honor endurance rather than glory, reflection rather than triumph. Family stories preserve nuance. Grandparents recount frost-bitten nights, lost comrades, long marches, and the soft cadence of survival. These stories emphasize subtle victories, a life preserved, a village defended, a routine maintained, a letter delivered. Children learn not of battles won, but of quiet endurance and human resilience. The environment itself carries traces. Abandoned camps gradually disappear under snow and soil. Yet some artifacts persist. A fragment of a boot, a button, a discarded musket, a rusted wagon wheel. These remnants are soft echoes, tactile reminders of hardship and human presence, speaking not through words, but through quiet, patient testimony. As years pass, the veterans age, their bodies slow, their hair grays, their hands tremble. Yet within them the rhythm of the march, the cadence of frost, and the subtle music of survival remain. They speak softly to children, grandchildren, neighbors, and strangers, sharing insights about endurance, patience, and the quiet tenacity of life in harsh conditions. The echoes extend into culture. Songs, poems, and folktales arise from the experience of the retreat and its aftermath. They are not dramatic. They are deliberate, slow, and reflective, mirroring the cadence of life itself. Each repetition reinforces memory, embedding history into a soothing rhythm, accessible to anyone willing to listen quietly. Memory and physical space intertwine. Rivers, forests, roads, and villages retain layers of experience. Each step along these paths evokes faint echoes of frost, the crunch of boots, the murmur of conversation, the soft shuffle of horses. The landscape itself becomes a repository of endurance, a quiet echo of history that speaks to the persistence of life amidst challenge. Veterans themselves create small rituals, a pause at a familiar stone, a quiet nod to an empty field, a soft touch to a weathered fence. These gestures honor the invisible companions of hardship, comrades, animals, and even the land itself. The rituals are personal, gentle, and meditative, marking survival without fanfare. Finally, the echoes reach the listener, history, as experienced through letters, routines, objects, and stories, becomes a slow, calming presence. It is immersive, detailed, and measured, yet gentle. It carries no urgency, no demand, no bright spark of excitement. It is perfect for contemplation, reflection, and rest. The soldiers return, the women who waited, the rhythm of survival, the letters, the frost, and the silence, all coalesce into a soft, enduring presence. It is a history that breathes slowly, that moves with gentle cadence, and that whispers across centuries. It is the echo after empire, the lingering trace of human endurance in landscapes vast, indifferent, and beautiful. And as night falls, as the cold wind subsides, as lamps flicker in quiet houses, these echoes wrap around the present. They remind us of the endurance of human spirit, the quiet rhythms that preserve memory, and the gentle, persistent passage of life, even after the tumult of history. In this space there is no rush, no spectacle, no urgency. There is only presence, continuity, and the subtle, mesmerizing rhythm of existence, a perfect cadence for reflection, calm, and eventually sleep. As the evening deepens, the stories we have shared begin to settle like soft snow on a quiet landscape. Each segment of history, from the frost-bitten marches of Napoleon's army to the silent endurance of those who waited at home, has carried us through a journey of patience, resilience, and quiet human experience. Now, as our journey reaches its gentle close, imagine yourself reclining in a warm room, the air soft and still, and let the echoes of these lives linger as a comforting hum in the background. Think of the soldiers once again, trudging through snow and mud, their boots heavy with ice, their bodies weary but persistent. The rhythm of their march is no longer a march of exhaustion or fear. It is a slow, steady cadence, that mirrors the gentle pulse of your own breath. Each crunch of snow beneath boots becomes a subtle lullaby, a soft reminder that life endures, even in the harshest conditions. The frost, the wind, the silence of frozen nights, all are now part of a meditative landscape, one where observation and reflection replace urgency and alarm. Remember the women who waited, tending their households, sewing letters into fabric, keeping hearths warm and hearts steadfast. Their endurance is a lesson in quiet presence, a reminder that patience can sustain us through uncertainty and absence. As you breathe slowly, imagine the soft flicker of a lamp, the muted rhythm of chores performed with care, the gentle whisper of prayers and songs that carried hope across miles of snow and distance. The persistence of these lives, quiet yet unwavering, now merges with your own awareness, grounding you in calm and continuity. Consider the soldiers' letters, the diaries, the notes hidden away in chests, vessels of memory and emotion, preserved for posterity. These words, written in frost-bitten conditions and moments of exhaustion, carry a gentle weight, a reminder that even in extreme hardship, small gestures of communication and connection endure. Picture yourself reading a letter softly by lamplight, the ink slightly blurred by snow and sweat, each line a testament to the human need for connection. Feel the rhythm of the sentences, the cadence of carefully chosen words, as if each phrase were a soft ripple moving across still water. The retreat across frozen plains, once a tale of endurance and suffering, now transforms in your mind into a meditation on rhythm, sound, and presence. Imagine each soldier's step as a steady beat, each muffled groan of wind through trees as a note in a quiet composition. The distant clatter of carts, the scrape of icy rivers, the whisper of boots over snow, all merge into a continuous low hum that soothes rather than alarms. This is a lullaby of history, subtle and persistent, inviting your own body to move in harmony with its gentle cadence. Picture the landscape after the war. Villages quiet, forests reclaiming abandoned camps, rivers flowing freely once more. Artifacts remain, fragments of boots, buttons, letters, and tools, each a soft echo of the past, waiting patiently for observation, reflection, and remembrance. In these relics, the weight of history is not heavy or intrusive. Instead, it is calm, contemplative, and steady, like the distant, reassuring pulse of time moving onward. The lives we have explored, the soldiers, their families, the communities, the landscapes, and the subtle rhythms of endurance, now settle around you as if a blanket were draped over your shoulders. The frost and mud, the letters and whispers, the snow-covered fields and abandoned camps, all fade into a soft, coherent narrative of survival, persistence, and quiet human presence. Your thoughts may wander across these scenes, noticing details, the flicker of a candle flame, the quiet crunch of snow beneath boots, the soft murmur of conversation over a hearth. Each image, each sound is gentle, deliberate, and soothing. Consider the passage of time itself, as it stretches across decades, centuries, and generations. The Grande Armée marched, endured, and eventually returned, leaving behind traces in the land, the communities, and the stories of those who lived through it. The echoes of frost, wind, and silence persist, not as trauma, but as rhythms, subtle, comforting, and continuous. Imagine yourself walking along one of these ancient roads, footsteps slow and steady, observing snow-melt streams, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant hum of life moving forward. The world after the empire was not devoid of beauty or calm. Life returned to villages, children grew, crops were sown and harvested, families reunited, and communities rebuilt. These rhythms, ordinary yet profound, are what sustain human life in the aftermath of challenge. Notice the gentle cycles of days and nights, the subtle changes of seasons, and the slow, steady unfolding of life that carries on beyond even the harshest events. Let your mind linger on the small details, the warmth of a hearth, the softness of a wool blanket, the faint scent of wood smoke mingling with the crisp air outside. These are the enduring constants, present in every era and every home, grounding you in comfort and security. Feel your body sinking with these rhythms, heart steady, breath slow, muscles relaxing. Imagine letters being opened, read, and carefully refolded, returning to their envelopes like quiet memories stored in drawers and chests. The words inside are soft, reflective, and patient, carrying with them the calm presence of those who lived and endured. Allow these words to echo in your mind, softening thoughts and drawing attention inward to a place of quiet observation and gentle reflection. Now, think of the soldier's steps, once hurried, then fatigued, and finally meditative. As a metaphor for your own body, each step of theirs becomes a subtle breath, each crunch of snow a pulse, each faint groan of wind a reminder of the softness of being alive and present. The cadence is slow, measured, and repetitive, guiding your mind toward calmness, focus, and rest. As you drift further into reflection, imagine the women who waited, the children who adapted, the villages that persisted. See them as soft silhouettes in the candlelight of memory, performing small, deliberate tasks, tending to life quietly, with patience and care. Their presence is calming, a subtle reassurance that even in absence, life endures, nurtured by vigilance, routine, and hope. The artifacts scattered across abandoned camps, buttons, tools, letters, and scraps of cloth, are now symbols rather than remnants. They represent patience, endurance, and subtle continuity. Picture them lying gently in the snow, waiting to be discovered, softly reflecting the light, and inviting your imagination to move slowly across history's quiet traces. Consider the rhythm of seasons as they pass. Winter yielding to spring, frost retreating, rivers flowing, leaves rustling softly in the breeze. The Grande Armée has gone, but the world continues, gentle and measured. Allow this awareness to settle within you, the continuity of life acting as a gentle anchor, grounding thought, body, and mind. The echoes of history, the rhythm of retreat, the endurance of waiting, the subtle music of survival, all these now fold into one continuous, soft presence. Allow your thoughts to drift across these landscapes with ease, noticing but not clinging, observing but not engaging, allowing each detail to pass like snowflakes settling on quiet ground. Imagine walking through a quiet village at dusk. Smoke curls from chimneys, fires crackle softly in hearths, and the faint hum of human life continues without urgency. Your footsteps are slow, measured, and light. Every sound, every movement, is a gentle echo of what you have witnessed in this journey through history. Notice the subtle rhythms, the flicker of firelight, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. Each contributes to calm, focus, and the sensation of gentle presence. Now, turn your attention inward. Feel your body connected to the present moment. Notice your breath, slow, steady, and unhurried. With each inhale, imagine drawing in the calm endurance of those who came before. With each exhale, release tension, worry, and fatigue. Let the quiet rhythm of history and the soft cadence of life guide your mind into stillness. The Grande Armée, the women who waited, the letters, the frost, the snow, the silence, all exist now as a meditative landscape within your mind. No danger, no urgency, no alarms, only observation, presence, and the gentle insistence that life continues. As you sink deeper into this reflection, allow the echoes of the past to merge with the quiet of your surroundings. The subtle crackle of a lamp, the soft rustle of sheets, the faint pulse of breath. These become companions to the rhythms you have followed across history. Let them guide your mind to a place of deep calm and relaxation. Every detail you have witnessed, from the frostbitten marches to letters preserved in chests, from abandoned camps to quiet hearths, now fades gently into a harmonious memory. Imagine it all as a soft, undulating landscape, gentle hills and valleys of human experience, smoothing into a calm, expansive plain of rest. The stories are complete, yet their echoes remain. They are not loud, they do not demand attention, they simply exist, soft and steady, like distant waves lapping at a quiet shore. Allow yourself to drift along these waves, to move with their gentle rhythm, and to surrender fully to the calm presence of history as it whispers you toward rest. Let your body and mind relax completely. Feel the weight of your limbs sink into softness, the steady rhythm of your heartbeat aligning with the gentle cadence of endurance and survival you have observed. Imagine the quiet of the villages, the snow-covered plains, the subtle rustle of letters, and the warm glow of fires, all merging into a soothing, continuous presence. And now, as your mind drifts further, as thoughts soften and attention fades, carry with you the simple truths that this journey has offered. Patience endures. Small gestures matter. Life continues, gently, persistently, rhythmically. Allow these truths to become a lullaby, a gentle guide into sleep. Breathe slowly, exhale gently, and let the subtle cadence of history carry you softly into rest. Sleep now. The echoes of the past, calm and measured, are here with you. They are a soft presence, watching, waiting, and accompanying you into the quiet, gentle night.